Okay, folks, well, we're in the home stretch here. We have our final speaker. We're really thrilled to have Kellye Testy with us for the symposium. She is currently the president of the Law School Admission Council. Everyone in this room knows and loves LSAC because they are the ones who develop and administer the LSAT and the Credential Assembly Service, and is really a wonderful companion organization in legal education that's doing a lot of innovative and exciting work. Before joining LSAC, Kellye served as the dean at Seattle and at University of Washington, and that was for 14 years, which is, you've really got my respect for that one, and also served as president of the Association of American Law Schools. She is one of the leading thinkers and innovators in legal education, and I've had the honor for the past 2 years to serve on the LSAC board and see Kellye's leadership in action, and I consider her also a mentor and a friend, and we're thrilled you're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great for you to still be here at this time on a Friday, so thank you for that. And Dean Bowman, I thank you so much for that introduction, very kind one. And you should all realize he's actually my boss since he's on the board. So if I mess the speech up, you know, who knows if I'll be the president tomorrow. But, you know, no anxiety, right? We don't worry. Yeah, law does anxiety well. I was thinking when I was listening to this panel that as now the leader of the Law School Admission Council and a group that worries a lot about how schools use our test, we have a fair amount to talk about with regard to anxiety, but I'll get there in a moment. I want to say first just a huge thanks to the school and huge thanks to the Law Review, all the students, and everyone who's been part of this program. It's been, for me, like being a kid in a candy store all day, getting to talk about education the entire day. And I think it's been a wonderful program, and I really appreciate it. My role is to kind of try and tie together a little bit some of what we did in the morning and what we did in the afternoon, and to just leave you with some concluding thoughts. And I do face that task with a little bit of trepidation, I have to say. I feel like I just watched an amazing basketball game, and now I'm supposed to explain why that layup was really cool, or why the shoe blew out, or whatever it might be. But it is, I always enjoy talking about education, and I want to start with saying that the reason why I enjoy that so much is, for me, education is really, I would say, really deeply sacred. I, have been, as Greg noted, a dean and professor, but I wouldn't have always guessed that. I'm a first-generation college grad in my family, and I am a product of public schools from the minute I started first grade all the way through law school. I applied to exactly one undergraduate institution once I realized that I actually had to go to college to play basketball in college, and then one law school. So public education all the way through both undergrad and law. And so I really love hearing the commitments that I've heard in the room today about education, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And I have this picture up to start us out of a terrific wave. And I always think in February it's good to think about Hawaii, and for one thing. But some of you may know, who follow waves and surfing, that waves that curl in like this are called pipelines. And a lot of what we talk about in education, and certainly a driving point for me in thinking about the work of LSAC today, is building the pipeline to justice and building the future of justice. So that's a metaphor that I think a lot about. But I think it also goes to show that all of us who care about education, who think deeply about it and care about extending it broadly, have a lot of challenges in front of us. So, some really, really big waves for us to conquer. Now, as we do that, I want to say that it's been such a pleasure to be in this building today, because as we talk about those issues, it's been so clear that we really do here, and many of us out there do share this common goal. When we work in education or we work in law, that's what we care about. We want to build a better world. We want a world where everyone can thrive. We want fairness and opportunity and just the ability to flourish as humans and people, and to create that for others. And so I think it's always good for us to remember that that is, in fact, the big picture of what we're all trying very, very much to do. And I wanted to share this quote as we begin this conversation at the end of the program, because Justice Sonia Sotomayor is certainly one of the heroes of mine, and I know of many in law. And she really understands, and this quote I think shows, that looking at education and equality more broadly are very linked. Until we get equality in education, we won't have an equal society. That promise of equal justice that we seek under our Constitution is very, very much, I believe, bound up in questions of equality in education and in that shared goal. And I want to say that I don't think it's a coincidence that right now, when you think about the challenges to law and you think about the challenges to education, those are coming very deeply at a time when wealth inequality in our society is so steep and getting steeper. Just for, I didn't put it up here today, but look at the difference in the spread today between the pay of the average worker and the average CEO. Not me, but a lot of them. And look at the spread, how that's changed over the last decade. Look at who owns the wealth in this society and how few. Challenges to legal education, as Dean Bowman mentioned, steep drops in the number of people coming to law school, coming at that time. Likewise, I don't think it's a coincidence that these challenges to the law and what it means to be educated are coming at a time when the demographics of our world are changing, where very soon will be, as they say, majority minority in this country. And I think there's a politics to all of that, a very close link between some of those threats to both justice and law and also to education, especially public education in our world. And I want to talk about some of those challenges. So as we've heard today, when we start to look at how to promote public education more broadly and how to promote very high quality education and law, certainly a lot of challenges that we have, and I don't want to dwell on these. I'm going to move through these quickly because we've heard a lot about them today, and I want to end on sort of a what might we really do about all this note. But we talked about, the serious and the persistent privatization of education. Same with law. Why does no one go to trial? Why does no one go to court? Because everything's settled privately, through firms that do mediations or otherwise. So much you hear about, contracts that give away your rights to go to court, right? So both in law and education, a lot of moves toward putting it out of the public realm and into the private realm. We've talked about the deepening social and economic inequality that plagues our country and our world. And we see a really deep erosion of what I think of as respect for the public, respect for government. Respect for law, even, and legal institutions. The idea of the public square, the sphere of the common good. We don't lift that up today and respect it, I think. And that's something that I think has really hurt our efforts both at law and at education. It's politicized, too. There's so many things today that show that many people think that there's always a politics to education, and it's become an issue that's, divided us across aisles. And that is so unfortunate. I think that's very new. Wanting to support people to get a public education of high quality used to not be an R or a D issue. We all thought that was a good idea, right? And so today you see a deep politicization of the idea of education, particularly higher education. And then, of course, the other challenge that we all have is technology, for good and for ill. Now, I'm one of those people who can barely live without her cell phone in her hand. So, I spent many years in Microsoft's backyard in Seattle. I'm not tech phobic. I believe in much of its transformative potential. But it's certainly a force that's moving really fast, that's impacting the way we live and work together and the way we interact that I think we need to take account of. So let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the things we've heard today and maybe some of the things that we could additionally add to that we might think about, how to help given what we've learned. Well, I want to start with politics. One of the questions that we ask in law schools a lot is, what's the difference between law and politics? Is there a difference? I believe there is, and that's a long topic that we could have a big discussion about. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't, as lawyers or as people who care about law and education, not focus on politics. We heard today about the need for activism, for a relentless focus on support for education in electoral politics. And I think there, at all levels, federal, state, local, from the school board all the way up through the Supreme Court, a focus on politics to support education. I also think the activism generally for the issue I mentioned about lack of interest in and support for the common good is so critical for us today in terms of urging that it isn't always just about individuals, that there is, as they say, a we that's greater than the me, and that policies that promote the common good, that ask us to think about that together and to work for it together, are ones we should be advocating for regardless of who it is that's serving us. And then I want to also put a special thumb on the scale today for what I call, and so many people call, coalition building. I mean, you heard today in the discussions the fact that so many people from so many different avenues are starting to see the same issues about the erosion of support for public education. That means that we can, link hands across those issues, even though we're often in different groups. Many of the speakers talked about the importance of, teachers themselves and the power that they have to bring these issues to the fore. Labor and, leaders and workers, of all stripes. Lawyers, of course, clergy, social justice advocates and activists. And they're on any number of range of issues, whether it's criminal justice, racial justice, because so many of these issues are linked, I think, as we all know. Today a focus on mass incarceration, as an example, certainly is also a focus on issues that we see in our educational pipeline. And so linking those many issues together and working across perhaps other differences to find this common ground, I believe is so vital. The second thing that I want to ask that we really think about and focus on is to make sure we're always thinking about education, not as an event, but as a journey. And it's something that I really see, and I'll use the example of legal education because it's what I'm so familiar with and focused on now. But so often when we start to talk about reforms in education or problems in it, we don't look at the whole thing. We look at just one little piece of it. So for example, sometimes we jump in and we start to talk about what's wrong with the bar exam. Or we want to talk about, well, should the LSAT have more skills on it than just critical thinking skills? Or, should we really just add more clinics to legal education? But we need to think about that whole pipeline, starting from pre-law, and there really we have to go all the way back to pre-K to talk about that pipeline, because that's where inequality starts. That's where educational inequality starts, and it persists. And so we need to think about that pipeline, that whole pre-law, that whole issue of educational equality from the get-go. We also need to think about then the admission process itself. We often feel that we're in a very odd situation as a company that writes the most respected test of critical thinking in the world, that we have to constantly say, it is good, but not that good. Don't use this as the one factor in admission. Use it as a factor, right? That's something that's so widely misunderstood. And many people will advocate for not using a test in admission, not understanding that the weight of all research shows that without a standardized test in admission, you reinscribe bias right back into the admission process. In fact, that's the whole reason the LSAT was created in the first place, was that we were seeing 70-some years ago that without it, blacks, Jews, women, many people were being kept out of legal education because admission was done solely on the basis of where'd you go to school, who wrote your recommendation letter, what activities that are probably expensive did you get to do when you were in high school, and there wasn't an opportunity to show that capacity without those connections. And so we need to look at that admission process too. Of course we need to look at legal education and what's taught there, because We should be looking at admission for who can succeed in law school. As noted, you invest a lot of money, and it's not fair to promise something that would be difficult to attain. But there, again, I'm not a big believer that somebody can't attain a legal education. I'm a believer that we need the support mechanisms to make sure that we understand that as students come to us, they're not all equally situated because of that structural inequality in education. So let's meet people where they are in education. Let's make sure everyone can thrive. And then that old bar exam. We can talk all day about that. I do think reform is needed at that place of licensure. But we also need to talk about, how does that happen in a way that still protects the public interest while also being fair, to the applicants and the candidates. So we need to think about education as a journey all the way through and not look at just one place along that. We can't fix one thing without really looking at the whole. And I'll give you another example of this in legal education. It's often said, and I believe it's true, that we should have far more diversity in legal education than we do. There's been progress, to be sure, we often say, but there should be so much more, because right now the legal profession does not look like the rest of society as a whole. Well, as laudable as that goal is, and I believe in it, it's going to be very hard to do for this reason. Right now, law schools in the United States are admitting every racial subgroup at or above the rates of college graduation. And so if we're going to do better, and we should, college graduation rates need to improve. Now, if you walked that back one more step to high school graduation rates, what would you see? The same issues of structural inequality. And so that's why we have to look at the whole pipeline, and we have to do better all along the way and see that journey for all that it is. The other thing that I want to encourage us to think about, in addition to using our politics and making sure we're thinking about education holistically, is I think we need to lawyer up. Justice is what lawyers do. Without lawyers, we don't have it. You heard so many examples today of what is it that's making a difference in education. Activism, yes. Teachers walking out, yes. But case law, the work that lawyers do, a lot of that work is the work of lawyers. And so I was really happy today that at the same time that we were talking about education and public education and how to make that better and stronger, we were also talking about how to make legal education stronger. Because if we don't attend to law, the rule of law, and legal education, that's going to play right into the hands of those who would like to see rights like public education rights dissipate. Where are the lawyers? You've seen this, and thankfully in the newspapers over the last couple years, we've seen lawyers portrayed in very positive lights. We've heard chants of let the lawyers in, right? Lawyers defend freedom, and so making legal education stronger and making that value proposition strong so that the best and smartest and most wonderful young people want to be lawyers and come to law is really critical. And so I love today that we were also talking about the issue of helping to make what happens in law school better, giving you more value for those 3 years. And those skills like leadership, skills like business acumen, project management, the client readiness skills that Dean Bowman and others talked about, there's no reason why there's not time for that in 3 years. It's not easy. I mean, it means that, some of these calls to make law school 2 years, I think, no. But I think make those 3 years really build on one another and make it worth it. And likewise, to talk about mental health, I think, when we start to talk about law and education is so critical. Because that anxiety that builds up, that becomes often an issue that a student needs to get, help with, often is exacerbated by the way we approach education. I'm no stranger to this now, having learned a lot about the LSAT and high-stakes testing. And I can tell you that we have so many innovations happening right now to try and do interventions to reduce anxiety, both at the study point and at the actual test-taking point. And I'm sure all of you can recognize that often you have even more anxiety if you're coming into a profession where you're one of the first in your family to be in that profession. And so there's also, very much a correlation to the issues of systemic inequality that we're looking at and that anxiety. So I'm happy we're talking about that in law, but we need to talk about that all the way through, from the way we teach kindergarten to the way we're teaching, in high schools, and what testing we're doing and how we're doing it and what it means. And so I think it's just terrific that, my new slogan is to, make education great again. That's spells out mega for a megaphone. I think we ought to use that. Now, I want to also share that in kind of wrapping up, and then I want to make sure I've left some time for questions you may have of me, or just dialogue with one another, because at the end of the day, you may have some things you want to tie together too. But I want to say that what for me really struck a chord today is just that one of my heroes is Bell Hooks. She wrote a wonderful book called Teaching to Transgress. And it's certainly the way I always approached teaching when I was a contracts teacher and a business orgs teacher and a gender and law and a race and law teacher in law school. What you're trying to do is spark, the life of the mind in teaching. Critical thinking, that's what education's purpose is. It's certainly what legal education's purpose, has been. And it's at the heart of anybody transforming their own life, as Bell Hooks has said. It is, in her words again, the practice of freedom. And that's something that I think if we could all hold that idea, that what we're trying to do is to reach every single person through education in where they are, in their own humanity, to help them become more free. Free thinking, free to make choices they want, free to make the kind of contributions they want to make to our world. I think we would get such a long way toward making both education and then legal education and law particularly helpful. Now, the last thing I want to end with is saying that in this bit of technology, and Dean Rothstein, you mentioned also the Google and your fondness for it. I always like to remind people that as helpful as it is, let's not confuse technology itself with education, right? And I usually have, don't confuse your Google search with my law degree, but we could also substitute in there the education degree or whatever it might be. There's so much change happening in technology and the way education's being done. And one of the things I think that we're really going to need to think about is as it becomes more and more something that happens either in an online format or in a blended format where people might be less, in the same room together, at least physically. I think that's a whole nother topic that we need to maybe do round 2 on a conference on. And what does that mean for some of the issues that we've been, talking here about today? So I want to close by saying that when I think about the issue of trying to make public education great, trying to make sure that we're making sure, ensuring that education is not just a matter of who can pay for it and who cannot. I want to remind us that this is not a problem, I think, of how to do it. This is a problem of will. This is a problem of commitment. This is a problem of priority. And what is it that we want to say through our values as a nation and as people about what really matters and who we want to extend the full rights of humanity to? So I believe where there's a will, there's a way. Many of you today, I think, ended on positive notes. And I want to just share that I feel that too. I think there is really a bubbling up of the will to make things better for more of us, to help everyone flourish. And so I want to say, let's all do what we can One of my colleagues, Kent Lawless, always uses the phrase, each one teach one. Each of you go out from today, over the weekend, next week, talk about this conference. Bring people into that circle. That is what will matter, is that individual responsibility and action that we take to make this world a better place. So thank you for being my partners and colleagues in this. I'm going to end there and just open it up for any questions or discussion with one another that you might like to have. Thank you.
Just wondering, what are some of the things LSAC is trying to do to increase diversity and access to a legal education? Is it simply just less questions about polo and hedge fund management? Or what kind of initiatives do you have?
Sure. So let me say that one of the things that shocked me when I'd been a dean for almost 15 years, and I walked into the Law School Admission Council expecting that LSAC and the LSAT were kind of one and the same thing. And it turned out that that's about a third of or so of what LSAC focuses upon. So one of the things that is certainly the case is that, I think it's been 20 years now since there has been a question on the LSAT that's had a challenge for cultural bias. And the reason for that is that all standardized tests used to. They would ask about polo or situate you in the great room of a house or something, and we set up a 10-step process about that long ago, including review of every question before it even goes out as a practice question. And the review's done by a committee that tries to include people that have almost any identity or intersecting identity you could think of, and it has to pass through that group. And I think my colleagues have shared that it's been, now a long time since there's been a question that's been found to be problematic. So that's one thing, but it really is just where you start. One little example is that starting with the next administration, when somebody comes into the room to take the LSAT, in addition to talking about, hand over your cell phones and don't wear a hood, all these security measures that we have to take, there's going to be a statement or recorded from me saying, I'm glad you're here. I'm a first-generation college and law grad. I want to make sure we believe in you. You are not your test score. We're working with schools to urge them to do holistic file review and, just giving some comforting words. There's a lot of research that shows that kind of an intervention at the start of a high-stakes test can make a difference. And so we're trying to use research that does that. We also, as some of you may know, launched free LSAT preparation through the Khan Academy. And that's been transformative because, you don't want to have say, well, this test is overused and matters so much, but good luck to those of you who can't afford to take a prep class, right? So now this is the highest quality prep. It's all actual questions, and and students are used to the Khan Academy. I wasn't because I'm too old, but my children are. They started using it for math, in middle school. So the use is terrific, and the results are terrific through that. And then there's just so many other things too that we're doing, and I would just put it this way. I want LSAC to be seen not as a barrier in any sense, but as a pair of outstretched hands, saying, we want you in the legal profession, we're going to reach towards you, we want to bring you here, we want to help you thrive. And that's what really why I'm where I am, and I want to work in all ways to try and make that so. Yeah. Other comments, not necessarily for me, but just thoughts you've had that you want to share about the day or anything? It's 4:30 on a Friday and they're ready to go.
They don't want to hear from me, so I'm just going to say.
But see, this is another sign that it's such a great, smart group, That's a very, humanistic, whole person kind of thing to want to do. So, well, let me, there's one of, sure. All right, we can talk on the way to the airport or something, right? Well, I want to just again ask whether any of the students who organized it have any closing instructions or anything like that, but I want to really thank you all. This was a very wonderful symposium to lead, and I think it will have far-reaching effect, not only in who's here and what happens from that, but also back to defending the law review. When you put something in print, it has a life of its own. So thank you all again, and have a great weekend. So, my pleasure. Well,